Bear with us. Welcome back to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours virtually.
We're coming from Garden A to Z.org. I'm Stephen Nicola.
I'm Janet Makanovich, and our topic now is pruning overgrown plants. We're breaking this into two chapters, the pruning part. We're starting off with deciduous and broadleaf evergreens. That's us. And that's the voice and the fingers on the keys in the chat. Our daughter, Sonia Nicola, is an excellent gardener, so she can answer your questions, but she mostly lines them up for our Q&A sessions. She's also a professor at a university, so she technically can help you with anything about the virtual media that we're in right now. Ask her and she'll help you out. The note-taking guide today is a one-page flowchart.
A record.
Crossing our fingers that this will work. We'll tell you as we go along how to get it, how to use it. And in chat, sorry, Steve, in chat, there is a link. If you haven't gotten it already, you can click that link to get it, and then you can use it afterwards. Click. Thank you. So we'll tell you as we go along where we are. We're right now going to work on deciduous and broadleaf evergreens, which means we're going to follow the top line. And there's one preamble before we start the flow chart. And that's to ask yourself as you get started doing this and as you're listening to us, why is it overgrown? Will it happen again? We're going to tell you about what we do and the weight that's involved with it, the weight as in weight and time. And you're going to need to make your own decision about whether or not you should do that, because it's entirely a personal thing. Why is it overgrown? Because we overplant, because we have to have one of everything.
We believe the nursery when it says it's a 5-foot shrub.
Yeah. And also because some of these shrubs don't listen to their catalog description. Those are Het's midget arborvitae in the background behind those dwarf boxwood, and they're not done growing yet.
Those are Het's midgets.
And we hear from people a lot. They say, look how it grew for me. Now, did grow for you. That's the way it grows. They just get that big. They also get overgrown because we shear a lot of things. We, as in people, not necessarily you in particular.
Yeah.
And when we shear, we cut across the soft new growth. See the dotted line there, but really we should be shearing harder than that, because when we shear out the soft new growth, we've left growth. It did grow an inch or 2 inches, and inch by inch, they get bigger every year. So we teach people to cut back further, to shear and to thin, to cut back further. But that's topics for our other webinars, and those are already recorded for you. As examples of overgrown, there's also the idea of the Weigelia. People think it's a cool bush for butterflies, and it is, and it's pretty when it first blooms, and then it gets quite gangly, and it's huge. It's a honeysuckle plant, family plant. It grows quickly, and people didn't expect this cute flower to get that big. Certainly not as big as the one by our garage there, which we showed you. You can just saw it off.
And if we could, we'd even cut it lower.
Yeah, I didn't mean to. I would have cut it lower. I was going to dig it out. Then I said, okay, never mind. I'll dig you out later. And in 1 year's time, it grew to the top of the orange line. I only cut it back in order to keep it from laying into the garage.
Yeah, it'll grow into the garage.
Yeah.
Give it a chance. Oops, did I move it?
Click, yeah. There you go. You know, Ginger once in a while gets around to each of her plants and says, okay, what do you need? You've overgrown. And we take out the old wood. And yes, eventually it becomes all new wood, but then the new wood gets older and we take it out. But we took out all the old wood so it would bloom. At the Detroit Zoo, we wanted to keep them little.
This is little.
By the split rail fence there. And so what we did is pruned them twice a year. In the springtime, well, after they bloomed, and that's that one after it blooms, we took out all the canes that bloomed. They're laying on the ground there. All that you see that's left there are the new stuff that was growing up from the bottom in the spring. And that's going to bloom a little bit later in the year. So in the springtime, we cut out the blooms, the ones that grew in the second half of last summer. So we're constantly keeping this thing with just new canes, brand new canes, and it takes 2 prunings a year. So we cut it back. Now it comes out from just those, and lots of little stuff coming from the base. The ones that were there from last summer are the ones that bloom. Then when they don't look good anymore,
Cut them out.
we take them out of there, gone. And we used to say to people, there's a great group of people maintaining the garden that we did for 30 years at the zoo. Now, and once in a while, we get to talk to them about it. But we used to, when we got a new person in the group, said, you have to come and prune Weigelia. Unless you are brave enough to do this, you can't really manage being in this group. So pruning overgrown plants requires generates a lot of debris, and not just now when you prune when they're overgrown, but on a continuing basis, you're going to have to keep pruning. So our son and daughter-in-law bought this house, and of course they're, everything's into the house. I look and see this hedge that's trying to creep up and eat the deck, and is half dead inside, and which prevents you from walking along the deck to do any kind of maintenance at all, and is so wide that you can't reach the prune. I said, we're not going to put up with this, but they don't have the money to yank them out and plant something new. So I cut them back. I cut out a truckload, a pickup truck load of dead wood out of the inside of these, just tangled dead wood, and left them, and they sprouted. There's the stems that I cut back, sprouting. And from way down low.
Let light in, the buds will come.
Yeah. Unfortunately, at the end of that year, they had the deck power washed and refinished, and the shrubs were not covered, and it killed a lot of the new growth. But by the next spring, they were leafing out, and you can see how thin they are, especially from some angles. And that's because of all the dead wood that I took out. They had only leaves at the tips, and most of those tips I took out.
That's what happens when you constantly shear the inside eventually. Yeah,
it gets to where it's too thick to let anything come in. If you look, most of the branches that they've got good are at the bottom. See them down at the bottom? They were growing out from the bottom. Eventually, those have got to come out. But for now, I left them in order to let it have some energy. So now I've got to cut back. I've cut back the back part of it, taken big branches out so you can walk between it and the deck. It's filling back out, and now it's growing. And I realize, oh my Lord, I now just got myself into having to prune this every year for them so that it doesn't end up being sheared like that again.
Yeah.
And that means a lot of wood, bags and bags and bags of branches every single year. Yeah. So it's still thickening up. You can still see some open spaces. Flowers come up in there. One visitor actually thought that the yew hedge bloomed at my son's house. So no, that's an impatiens glandulifera coming up. But every single year in August, once a year, when it's like this and the fingers are extended, but the growth is stopping for the year.
Now's the time.
Then I cut back, and I'm still cutting back inside the outline, and I'm still taking back some of the branches that that were, but now it's down lower, and now you can walk between the deck and the shrubs, and you can reach to prune from both sides of the shrub. So remember that, make your decision to cut something back based on the fact, based on what you're realistically looking at for the future. So start off with the question, is it evergreen or deciduous? If it's deciduous, or it's a broadleaf evergreen. Broadleaf evergreen or a yew. So a needled evergreen is something like a spruce. With needles. Broadleaf
is like a holly or a yew.
Or
I mean, not a yew, a holly or a grape holly.
Yeah, and the yew is also a broadleaf. It's in its category of itself. So it's a hemlock. Sorry. And speaking of, that'd be azaleas, euonymus, hollies, Pierce Andromeda, Boxwood, Rhododendron.
Yep.
And speaking of hollies and broadleaf evergreens, so you get a broadleaf evergreen, we can treat it pretty much the same way as a deciduous plant. This holly was ugly and so overgrown. This is a pyramidal tree holly. Ha, 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 right? And it had not been pruned in a long time. I did that to it. And by the end of the year, it looked like that.
You must have faith.
And then I shaped it. So now every year, when it looks like that in August, I prune it. It's half pruned there on the left. Can you see that I'm cutting everything back to my outline, and then I'm thinning deeper. And this is my place to remember to tell you, when you prune back overgrown stuff, beat the hedge or the shrub first, hit it with the backside of a rake.
Oh, yeah.
Find out what's in there. In this case, it's a bird's nest, but often enough, it's a bee's nest or a wasp's nest. Find out what's in there before you start putting your hands in to cut. So every single year, I take out that much. And yes, I took out the bird's nest. It was becoming exposed by as far back as I was cutting. So the bird's nest is in the debris pile too. So every year, cut it back to shape, and every year it's going to end up on like it is on the left again. You're roping yourself into that kind of contract. And when they're a hedge that's been hedged here, and we want it to be smaller and neater, I'm going to do the same thing. I took out lots of old wood, threw it to the side, said, come on, bud out. It budded out, and then I took back the heavier pieces and took them right out. So I'm cutting that heavy piece out and throwing those to the side. Yeah. And that article is in spring means cut, cut, cut. If you were to go to our search terms and go spring cut, you would find a whole list of plants
that you could cut
back in the spring, and links to those articles. Now the needled evergreens we'll get to in chapter 2, but that's the pines, the junipers, the firs, the arborvitaes, the cypresses and false cypresses and ceduses and the spruces. Okay, so if it's deciduous, it's overgrown. If it has a lot of canes of a lot of different sizes, little ones and big ones, then we're gonna cut it one way. If it has, just look at these are well-spaced canes of pretty much all the same size, versus look at all those different sizes of branches. If I cut across the dotted line on that shrub, I am taking almost all of the energy producing off and leaving it with all the wood that needs the energy. The leaves produce energy, or the leaves on the U here. I'm better off to cut harder, cut further back, and leave less wood for it to take care of. So on something like this U, April, if you're with us today, I'm not picking on your U. And she said, I'm going to take it out. It's just so ugly and it doesn't belong there. I said, well, let me show people how we would cut that back. You would take out the weak wood. And again, the good stuff is going to be at the bottom. It's been growing out from way low on the U branches and some at the top. And then I thin it back to a bunch of canes that are in various sizes. Some are deep in the plant, some are further out. And say, okay.
It's not a shear, it's cutting
those individually. And then you let that grow back, which April didn't do because she was going to take it out anyway.
Yeah.
But on that hydrangea in the background, all we leave is some good sturdy wood, not all the little bitty stuff that's crisscrossing and all around. If you're pruning back something overgrown, you don't want all that little twiggy stuff at the outside edge. We've turned it
constantly sheared.
Yeah, we turned it into what you see on the right by going down into the bottom and taking out all the weak little bitty ones and the bigger old ones. We let it bloom one last time and then took out the ones that bloomed all the way down to the ground, and every year it blooms again. And that's in Prune a Dwarf Lilac. So you could look up an article called Prune Dwarf Lilac in the search, and that would come up. So would pruning other types of lilac. So for instance, thought it would come would be the late winter pruning of things like a standard lilac there.
There.
Yeah. Rhododendrons get overgrown and they get weak. So this rhododendron has been reaching out from where it was planted. All of the growth or most of the growth is out at the outside edges and it's too big. I prune it back. This was in April of that year. And if you look at the bottom on the left side, you can see all the new growth that's coming that now is getting light because it's been pruned, all the twigginess on the outside taken out, and it fills back in. So 5 years later, and this is being pruned all the time to keep it small. It's thick and lush, and you can see how it gets in August every year and has to be cut back. It's a beautiful, healthy plant. So have no fear. Trust the plant, like Steve says, and cut it back. So you cut out the weak, the wood, and the old, the new, the weak wood that's whether it's new or old. Yeah, old. Leave only the strong stuff. And as you're working, if you see any signs of disease or insect infestation, address that. So I'm cutting back Audrey's rhododendron here. It's in the top left. You can see it towering over everything and the branches on the top trying to get up as tall as the window. And as I go back to prune it back, I find that it has a problem with borer. So I'm taking out whole branches. You can see the hole in it in the background. That's borer damage, rhododendron borer. And it gets into, like many borers, it is a problem of weak plants more than anything else. That whole cane was so far extended with wood and no green on it that it had become weak and the borer could get in through the trunk. So I'm taking all of that part off. See, those branches were sprouting. You can see the new shoots, how rhododendron grows from bare wood. And so here it is back again. You can see it. That's 5 or 6 years later. I don't have a picture of it in between, but it came back well. You can see that it's still alive. You can do that. If you see discolored wood, this is a sumac branch, and sumac is prone to a Botrysphaeria, I think is how it's pronounced. It's a fungal disease. It's a fungal infection. It generally gets into damaged wood. So there might have been some damage on the wood at the tip, and the fungus was able to get into the damaged wood, and it'll cause it to die, branches to die back. It's a fungus, and that fungus can get onto your pruners and go on to the next branch. And what you want to do is make sure that if you see signs like this, if you see discolored wood, if you see deformed wood,
if you see pustules,
chewing on wood, then it's best to sterilize your pruning tools. Okay, when can you do this? Any dry day. But the best season is now, the end of winter, the very beginning of spring, before things bud out, for a bunch of reasons. You can cut any dry day. So poor mom, Steve's mom, she always got, it was like the shoemaker's kids, right? So I was the last place that I got to in the spring. So we're cutting back her burning bushes after they've started growing for the year.
Yeah.
You can see on the front porch there, all of the branches that I've thrown out of the one on the right-hand side. And then after cutting those branches back, the little pieces laying out on the sidewalk where I've thinned further down. I've cut some branches further down, because these guys are too big for that. Those branches that we take out, that are taking out the twigginess of the plant, you don't miss them.
No, not on a burning bush.
It just keeps it from being overgrown and up over the window.
And taking over the house.
Right. So when I first cut it back, I cut it back evenly to the height that we wanted, or a little less than what we wanted. And then I thin out those branches to take out that twiggy guy in the middle.
We'll take this one out.
And cut it further
Maybe
down.
that one down.
And they rapidly green back up again. And then we use the twigs to hold up things that might flop over, like some of the dahlias. When you cut to varied lengths, cut some deeper and some taller, some wider and some less wide. What you want to do is cut an overgrown plant back to give it about a foot to grow new growth from the tips, wherever you started, and a foot on the side, so that you're not starting just from hardwood. How are you going to cut it again later that way? And that might mean that you're cutting it all the way down to a 1/2 inch. You're cutting it down to walkable level. If it's deciduous or a broadleaf evergreen, you can do that, and it has the ability to come back.
Yeah. You have to have faith.
You have to have faith. Privet, fast growing plant. Neighbor says it's up too much over the window. I said, let me prune it for you. So I'm pruning the one on the right. I've taken out old wood all the way out, taken out the weak old wood. It was like on the left. Now it's like on the right. And I've cut some branches back below the windowsill, as well as cutting some all the way down at ground level. I lost control. And that's what I want to end up with, is something like you see on the right. Varied heights, there's foliage going to be coming from all through it. Because I know that privet can grow on the branch on the right, unbranched, 1 year's growth. That's 1 year's growth, 4 feet, straight up out of it. I know that's what it can do. If it has branches at the tip, it will split that energy between 2 and maybe grow 2 feet from each branch. But I want the more vigorous growth to promote those branches along the sides down here
to fill
in. And it's the mainer branches, the bigger branches that you want to sprout. Those bigger branches like where Steve's pointing right now, are the branches that are going to give you substantial new branches. The little bitty stuff at the bottom, all those little twiggy guys, yes, they've got green out at the tips, and you could leave that for energy for the plant for right now, but that's not going to do anything for you. You want to cut back to main branches and let them sprout out.
Which they will do.
Right. And yes, it'll look silly at first, but one of the reasons that now is a good time to do it, to do any kind of hard cuts on overgrown plants, is that people don't notice that something is gone this time of year. People don't say, what happened to my plant? You can just cut them as you will. And the other reason is that growth is just about to start, and as the plant puts a lot of energy into that first growth, what you want is that growth to occur where you want it to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it means cutting really hard. This mulberry was
Real hard.
was too big. She said, you know, could you give me some pointers on how to prune it? I said, yes, here's what we're going to do to it. Here's what it did in first year. I said, is that better than what you see in the little inset picture on the top? Yes, she said, that's what I want. I don't want it on the gutter and I don't want it up so high. Good. Well, it's little. So every year you can cut it back like that.
Yep.
Prune weeping cherries. This one's up over the roof. And over a period of about 3 years, I cut it back. I cut main branches right down so that the one that was laying on the roof is not on the roof anymore. Take that one out.
Yeah.
And then prune the rest of the plant back. So you can do it gradually if you want to do it.
Take your time.
Or I could do the same thing that I did to the mulberry and leave just the weeping branches that are grafted to the top here. And that's an issue with weeping plants. I cut a lot out every year out of this, but the branches that Steve is pointing to right now, I'm going to shorten that one. But the trunk is a different plant, and I have to leave at least the bases of the weeping part. So when I cut those branches back, you might see the cut that I've made on it.
Right there.
It's going to grow from there or from a little shorter down, but I need to leave those weeping branches, those branches that weep. Cutting back, this is a honeysuckle. It's in dispute whether it belongs to the house on the right or the house on the left, but it's not in dispute that it is blocking the view of people coming to the stop sign. They can't see the kids that run back and forth along the street.
Which there are a lot of.
So it's got to come down. Okay, so I expose the middle so you can see what's going on in here. There's old wood and there's little skinny new wood. I said, oh, well, I'm going to take out all the old wood. So I'm sawing out the old wood. First, I'm sawing off the edges to take the weight off of it. And then I go down to the bottom and take it out at the bottom. And I take out all the old wood or most of the old wood and I stand back and go, nope, not small enough yet.
No.
I'm taking out the rest of the old wood. So there we go. We're leaving only strong new wood. I took out the weak stuff. I took out all the old stuff. I had to come back with a power saw to take out the big stump that you see on the right there, because I don't want that. And all the debris that you see behind, that's it.
That was it.
And this was not in spring when it was a good time. It was when it was dangerous and people realized it was dangerous. It's coming down now. So that was in late summer. Here it is, the second spring after. The first spring after, I cut down the rest of the branches that were left. And now, second spring after, it's beginning to get up to block the
sign again.
Start pruning again. So you cut things to varied lengths then. And what you want to do is peel back anything that's shading, whatever. If you cut it all the way down to little stubs on the ground, or you cut it down to a foot high, make sure nothing is shading that growth, because light is what's going to cause that branch to sprout dormant buds. And I tell people wait 4 to 6 weeks of a growing season, not the winter, but 4 to 6 weeks of a growing season for it to sprout. So we've peeled back, and we can never successfully peel back all the ivy here, because that ivy could very quickly, even with just a couple of leaves, shade those branches that are going to sprout.
Yeah.
Then you wait. If there's sprouts, yes, fine tune your cut. Favor the strongest wood. And as you do it, watch the growth rate. So on the left, a shrub that we cut, as you just saw, to nothing but main branches, 1st of April. This is the 1st of June. And that's what it's done. The other one, we cut half of it the 1st of April and left the other half of it so we could see what it would do. And we're getting sprouts from the little bits of green that we already left. And we're waiting for more sprouts to come in the center so we can thin out the outside, because our fine tuning will be thinning out all of those, that rabble of crowded branches. This one, we just cut the rest of it back. So that's our fine tuning for that. And this is later that year. Now, we got an email just this week. The timing is so perfect on this. We really need to share it with you. Thanks a lot, Joyce, for sending this in. She said, yeah, a different Joyce. Joyce Vincent. She sent this to us and said, I'm afraid to cut them. I know you said we should, but I'm afraid they've been sheared forever, and I think they're pretty weak and sticky inside. We sent her some notes last year on what to prune, so she did.
She went ahead and did it.
So here is number 3, the one next to the door after she cut it. And here it is now. See them grow? They will grow.
Be patient.
And now it's time. Now it's time to fine tune. Now it's time to nip back some of the tall ones that are going off to the right, because we don't need that much over there. Is to cut back some of the ones that are just twigs at the top, and to cut that branch that it's coming
This
from
right
back
here.
further.
Cut it down into there.
That's fine tuning. Fine tuning in some cases, you just bite the bullet. We took these shrubs back to these. That's the 3rd year though, after growing. Because when I looked inside, I went, this is going to take years to sort out the mess of tangled, dead, non-productive wood inside this shrub.
Look at all that.
That's what the inside of our son's hedge looked like when I got started, and a lot of dead as well. And I don't want to do all that to the front of yours. I said, we're just going to saw these guys right off.
Take them right.
The lopper and saws back to nothing. So they look like that the 1st of April when we cut them back. This was later that summer. We were forgiven by our friends at that point. Okay, I guess they're growing. This was the next spring in May.
And right then we had to go out and tell Jerry to stop shearing.
I said, okay, now we have to teach you how to do this. Stop shearing them.
He was going to go out and start shearing them right now.
They're creeping on you. You want to sit on that bench and talk to people walking by on the street, then you want them to only be this tall. So you can shear them, but you have to thin them also when you shear them. So you might be able to see the pockets where after I let Jerry shear, and then I went through and I reached in and took some branches back deeper every single year. And fine tuning is a matter of saying, what are my main branches? If you're working on a topiary or an espalier, then you know that someplace in there are the main branches that form the pattern.
That is really
this, yes.
That truly is.
And it gets pruned like that twice a year, every year by the gardeners who take care of the Niagara Falls Botanic Garden. So if I went underneath the bush with Teresa and said, let's figure out what your main branches really are. Which branches do we want to keep? And every year you can cut back to those main branches. And she said, I am empowered. I can get my deck back now. I can actually sit on my deck because now I know which branches to cut back to. And sometimes you have to just say, okay, it took 2 of us pulling to untangle the mess of branches, because these have been sheared. These crab apples had just been sheared, and they were just a tangled
They're way
mess.
over the sidewalk. They
said, okay, let's pick main branches that go in different directions, and we'll cut back to those. This was in May. This was May of the no, it's May of the same year, three weeks later.
Yep.
They will grow back. Have faith. Observe the growth rate means watch how fast it grows, because that tells you how much you have to prune each year. There's no keeping this forsythia small enough to fit between the house and the driveway.
It's not meant to go there.
It's just too big a plant, but she likes forsythia. So every year, follow the sequence here. Every year I cut it back. It comes up. The next spring it blooms. And I cut it back again. Then it grows back. It gets to be big. Sometimes I even have to cut it again in the summer, and it blooms the next year. And sometimes I miss the bloom and only see the fallen flower petals. So observe the growth rate. Burning bush in May, cut back like you see there. Maybe you don't see there. See the twigs on the right-hand side? It was already in growth and cut back. Now look, and I wasn't taking pictures to find where it was. Look in July. Can you see the pieces sticking up in the background? That's from that plant. That's from the one that was cut back. And they're turned dark red in the fall. So that burning bush, even cut back while it was in its primary growth, was still able to grow 3 feet that year. Keep that stuff in mind as you're putting things back together. So you're looking at a burning bush branch, and even though it's dividing its energy up at the tops of the branches, each new divided branch is still able to grow 18 inches. Keep that in mind, because that's how far you need to cut it back. So we want these burning bushes to be only 3 or 4 feet high. So every year they're cut back like you see here. Maybe you don't know those are burning bushes. Point out the burning bushes.
Here. Sorry.
When they get like this, they get weak. Cut it back.
There's too much stuff on the top, not enough on the inside.
So you can do this to the mulberry. I showed her first, I said, we could just do this, but it's still going to be big. And that's why we cut it down to a more manageable level. Willows, this is a tree willow, one of the blue dwarf willows on a standard. Sometimes people have the dappled willow with the variegated leaves on it. And Janet, this is Janet's house. Janet said, it's really gotten too big. I said, yeah, I think so. This is what we want it to be. Cute little fuzzy tree. So first, because it was the middle of the summer, I just cut it to thin it. So let's let it, I won't cut it back all the way hard.
We thinned it.
Yeah, we thinned it out. Left it like that. So the next spring, then we took it back to that. And over the years, cutting it several times, you can see it's getting knuckles on it, but we keep cutting back to that same point. And that same point is as far as Janet can reach. And then every year we get that. And because its growth rate is extremely strong, we also get a lot of suckers that have to be taken off while they're soft.
Yeah, while they're still soft. Don't wait till they get hard.
It's called rubbing them out. When they're soft, you just rub them off. And remember that some things, the growth rate involves suckering more. Some plants that sucker, like Virginia sweetspire, if you cut them back real hard to the ground, you're going to get more.
You're going to encourage more
suckering. And that plant's already a problem. Every single year I have to take suckers out. Like you see on the top left, it was invading the walkway. I've cut it back and taken all those suckers off that you see laying in the back. I've dug them out. And still I have to cut that plant back when it blooms in order to keep it small enough for the flower garden. Okay, and once it's reached however tall you want it to be and however wide you want it to be, start pruning again. Don't let it get overgrown. So there's a 3-year lapse between cutting back these pyramidal arborvitaes on either end of the hedge and what you see on the bottom, and giving up on the hedge because it was ugly.
Yeah.
So it was 24 bricks high when it started. We brought it down to 17 bricks. I'm not moving anywhere. Oh, and we're still keeping it at that size. So 10 years later, we're still keeping it at that size. It's fuller now and deeper. The foliage goes all the way.
It's healthier.
Year by year by year, getting better. Right at the very beginning, it still was doing what you was doing. It was showing that it would grow from the trunk. So the first thing that we did was take out branches to let light reach the trunk and encourage that growth. And that's what it looked like the next spring after we thinned it out and taken the top back. So now that next spring, we could say, okay, look at that growth coming. Those little bitty buds are now branches coming up in there.
They're really shooting out.
So we cut it back, take off the side branches, cut it back into something we can make into a pyramidal shape. And then unfortunately, a late freeze
of course
killed some branches back. So we didn't prune it. Then we waited until August. And that's what it looked like in the 3rd year. And that's what it looks like now. And we prune it every year in August because that's when you got to keep on top of these things. I'm not moving again. So Joyce asks, can I cut this back? Yes. But you're going to need to do what we did. You're going to need to stimulate some growth on the inside and get that plant going again. And make your bones selection, which branches you leave wisely.
Yes.
When I first cut back the right-hand pyramidal view, I left the branch that you see hanging out to the front and double tops there because, well, the owner was there and she was worried that this is an awful lot of cutting back to do. But it wasn't the pyramidal shape. I shouldn't have left that one there.
Nope.
So over time, I had to keep cutting out other branches
To get
it back to there, but I still had multiple tops. So 10 years later, this year, last August, I said, okay, that's it. I'm getting rid of those multiple tops. Just too much. I took the left blue arrow. I took that trunk right back down. So that's not in the way anymore. Oh, I took it down further.
It's gone.
Yeah.
You took it down here.
But now I got to sort out that mess that's up there, which has become much thicker. So I took out pieces like this, leaving it with, see the teeny new tip it's got? But now it has one top.
Which is a pyramidal should have 1 liter.
And we called that article Porky Pyramidal Views. Pyramidal alone brings it up on the search. If it doesn't sprout in 4 to 6 weeks, and you've already waited a couple of times for 6 weeks for it to come back, you know, but you can let them wait again. This one, Susan decided, no, it hasn't budded out yet. Let's just take it out. Whereas this one, we cut back the boxwood hedge. It was what you see on the top, a little bit of winter damage, but you couldn't even tell that there was a wall behind it, could you? On the bottom, it's cut back shorter, and you can see a lot of brown, and that worried her. We said 4 to 6 weeks, give it 4 to 6 weeks, and she did. And from the cut back in March to June of the next year, completely full, completely wonderful. This hedge, boxwood hedge on the left, gotten so high that you can't even really see that there's a wall and rock garden plants in it. We cut it back so that now it is as short as you see on the right. I know it's not a great picture, but it's what I had. I'm not moving. It was very thick, very wide, starting to take over the garden. A lot of dead wood. See the little skinny twigs that are dead in there, and a lot of unproductive wood on the inside. So we cut it back like you see there. Low growth, that's green, bare branches above. And they took their time to come back. They took their time. Fortunately, I have a very indulgent client who said, I believe you, I believe they'll come back.
There are people that don't like green bananas, so they might not like this type of procedure.
Right. So we're looking at the left hand where we started. We can't even tell that there's a bench and a nice garden in there. And now where we are now, where we have a low hedge, and we can see that there's a nice garden inside. Now, Japanese maples, beautiful but too big, cutting it down. Takes a warrior gardener to do this kind of stuff. Beautiful Japanese maple, you're nervous about taking that branch that's coming out over the walkway. What do I do? These are things that I'd rather set aside for later. Japanese maples that make people too nervous. We have a number of articles, put in Japanese maples and they'll come up. They'll tell you when to do it and how to do it. And you can go there, including a whole series of pictures
of how
to. Okay, but if you've waited or you don't want to wait any longer, take it out.
Yep.
Take it out. Just say, forget it.
You tried it and it didn't work.
It won't grow by your rules. Take it out. You've gotten rid of most of it already. Now you just have to get the rest of it out. Okay, what questions do we have about cutting back overgrown deciduous and broadleaf evergreens?
Okay, great. So first up, just a quick clarification from Mark that I didn't feel confident to answer. Arborvitae are on the broadleaf or the needled?
They're needled. They're needled.
Okay. Yep, I think I whiffed that one. I always find them very liminal in terms of which one. So yes, so follow the broadleaf path for arborvitae questions. Okay, Roberta has a relatively easy one. When is it safe to trim back acoustic dogwood? I didn't get to it last year and it's much taller and fuller than I want. Now, right?
Yes, now is a good time. Whatever branches you remove are of course not going to be there to bloom.
Yeah.
So some people would say, oh, let it bloom first. I would say, no, cut it back now when you can see the framework and know what you want to get done. I wish Acoustic Dogwoods didn't have to get pruned at all.
Great.
Just great.
Speaking of the now and the sort of the intensity of like, let's get things done, we can get it done. Bob and I were having a back and forth clarifying about deeper freezing temperatures in the 24 to 48 hours following pruning. Is that going to damage fresh cuts? What can we do to keep an eye on and mitigate that?
Right. The rules of the thaw still apply. We're still looking at the late winter, early spring time. You want to cut when after your cut, you've got 24 to 48 hours, but the temperature is not going to drop precipitously and be into the freezing temperature. So I want it to be above 28 degrees when I'm pruning. And I want that to stay for 24 to 48 hours after I finish pruning. So
okay.
Don't go out there today. I think it's going to be down to 20 and 18 in our area. And
yeah, so it's not that you're not looking to wait until it's been 24 hours of warm and then prune. You're looking to prune knowing that you then have the window.
That's right.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Okay.
I love Teresa's rule. I love Teresa's rule. You got to be tough to live in our yard. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Maria has a tough one. My 30-year-old rhododendron has been severely browsed by deer. The entire bottom portion is bereft of leaves. Will these grow back? Should I lop the bare branches off?
Yes, rhododendron will grow back from bare wood, and it will grow back most strongly from the base. So cut it back hard. If it was a healthy rhododendron, it's just going to sprout right back out, and protect it, because the new sprouts are going to be tasty to those same deer.
Yes, very tasty.
Yeah.
I hate it. They stand right there and look in the kitchen window and eat the rhododendrons. Yes.
With one eye, like looking at you while they chew. Like, yeah. What of it? Yep. All right. Diane says, what do you do with overgrown fall cypress that is bare inside and too tall? And just for everyone else, in case you're not checking in on the chat, the Pruning Evergreens webinar, it's webinar number 23, is in the free library. So whether you're a subscriber or joining us just for this weekend, we did do a whole webinar on evergreens especially, and that might be helpful. But for quick advice, overgrown fall cypress, bare inside, too tall.
Chapter 2, needled evergreens. Fall cypress, our PJ Facts is pine, juniper, false cypress, and firs, sorry.
Yep.
Arborvitae and cypress, fall cypress, etc. So we'll show you those in a bit.
Great. Okay. Then overgrown forsythia, Gretchen says, needs to have all the old wood taken out. If you do that now, do you lose the bloom for the year? Worth it for the long-term health of the plant? Similar in the chat, we've got Kathy asking about viburnum, prune back now or after bloom. Is there any different advice than just if you want to keep it under control, don't worry about the bloom? Is there any other way to think about that question?
I think that's the best way to think about it. I'm trying to keep the size under control. Forsythia, if we showed you pictures of cut back, and we waited until it bloomed and then cut it back every single year, cut it back. For 10 years, cut it back, and it just keeps coming back. But if it's way over, it's a great big ugly thing all overgrown, just cut it back.
Just
don't try to sort it out. Give up the bloom. It's not going to be a beautiful bloom anyway with all that ragged.
Once you hack it, it's going to have all sorts of stuff all over if you don't cut it back.
Now, a lot of things, and the viburnum is one of them. If I cut that viburnum all the way down, it'll grow back. No problem with a viburnum. Cut it all the way down, it'll grow back. Viburnums and lilacs, they're in the same family here. They tend to sprout lots of new suckers. Your fine tuning is going to involve thinning out and deciding how many of those you want to keep.
Yeah, we are getting more questions coming in fast and thick. So we might want to move on, and I'll keep recording things for possible chat transcript.
Yeah, because we're probably going to be doing that. That is for sure. Go ahead. Okay. So we'll call that enough for chapter 1 of Pruning Overgrown Plants and move into chapter 2, Needled Evergreens. Stick with us. We're gardenataz.org, and we're just breaking up our recording so you don't have to listen to the whole thing over again.